It was just another sunny morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly bloomed flowers. Residents walked their dogs, children rode their bikes, and joggers dotted the sidewalks, taking advantage of the beautiful weather. Among them was Marcus Williams, a 29-year-old software engineer who enjoyed jogging as a way to clear his mind before the workday began. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and black running shorts, Marcus jogged along his usual route, lost in thought, as music played through his wireless earbuds. Everything about the morning seemed routine, until it wasn't. About halfway through his run, Marcus noticed a woman standing on the edge of her driveway, her gaze fixed firmly on him. She was in her late 40s, dressed impeccably in a pastel cardigan and designer sneakers. Her expression was one of concern, even suspicion. Marcus had encountered subtle glances like this before, but he chose to ignore them, focusing instead on the rhythm of his steps. As he jogged past her house, Marcus heard the unmistakable sound of a phone being dialed. Curious but cautious, he glanced back briefly and saw the woman speaking animatedly into her phone. His stomach tightened. He knew that look, and he knew what it often led to. Moments later, the wail of police sirens shattered the morning calm. 2 squad cars pulled up beside Marcus, lights flashing. The officers exited their vehicles, hands resting on their holsters. Marcus's heart raced, but he kept his hands visible and his demeanor calm. He knew the drill all too well. "Sir, can you stop for a moment?" one officer asked, his tone firm but measured. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" Marcus responded, keeping his voice steady. "We got a call about a suspicious person jogging in the neighborhood," the officer explained. Marcus's jaw clenched. Suspicious? For jogging? He took a slow, deliberate breath, willing himself to remain calm. "Suspicious how?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. The officer hesitated, seemingly aware of the absurdity of the situation but bound by procedure. "We're just following up on a call," he said. The scene drew the attention of neighbors, who peeked from behind curtains or stepped out onto their porches. Some recorded the interaction on their smartphones, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. It didn't take long for the encounter to go viral. Within hours, footage of Marcus calmly explaining himself to the officers circulated online, accompanied by outraged commentary. Social media users were quick to condemn the woman's actions, dubbing her yet another example of racial profiling in America. Hashtags like #JoggingWhileBlack and #RacialBias trended nationwide. But the story was far from over. As the video continued to gain traction, discussions erupted about the deeper issues at play. Why did incidents like this keep happening? What role did implicit bias play in how people perceived others based on their race? And perhaps most importantly, what could be done to change this narrative? The incident became a flashpoint, sparking conversations about race, privilege, and accountability. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing Marcus, local activists, and even law enforcement officials. The woman who had made the call faced public backlash, though some defended her actions, citing concerns about neighborhood safety. For Marcus, the experience was both humiliating and empowering. "I shouldn't have to explain my existence," he told a reporter. Jogging while black shouldn't be a crime. As the dust settled, one thing was clear. This was more than just a viral moment. It was a catalyst for change, a mirror reflecting the societal biases that persisted despite progress. And Marcus, though reluctant, found himself at the center of a movement he hadn't asked to lead. The viral encounter between Marcus and the police was not just about one woman making a phone call. It was a reflection of a much larger societal issue that had persisted for generations. As social media users dissected every frame of the video, a familiar question echoed across comment sections and talk shows. Why does simply existing as a black person in certain spaces often provoke suspicion? Journalists and activists began digging deeper into the patterns of racial profiling in the community. The suburb, known for its picturesque streets and low crime rates, had a history of similar incidents that hadn't gained as much public attention. Neighbors shared stories of delivery drivers being questioned by residents, young black teens being followed in local stores, and even Marcus himself recalling subtle but persistent instances of profiling during his morning jogs. "I've lived here for 5 years," Marcus told a local reporter. I pay taxes, I contribute to the community, but I still get treated like I don't belong. That morning wasn't the first time I noticed people watching me like I was out of place. It was just the first time the police got involved. The woman who had made the call, identified as Susan Miller, became the target of intense public scrutiny. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages ranging from criticism to outright threats. Some defended her, suggesting she was simply acting out of concern for neighborhood safety. Others argued that her reaction was a textbook example of implicit bias, a subconscious association linking blackness with danger. A local community meeting was organized to address the incident and the broader issues it had highlighted. Emotions ran high as residents, both black and white, shared their perspectives. I've lived here my whole life, said one older white resident, and I've never seen anything like this happen. Susan's a good person. She's not a racist. But a young black mother in the audience stood up and countered, it's not about whether she's a good person or not. It's about the fact that my teenage son can't walk to the park without being questioned about what he's doing here. That's the problem. Experts on racial bias were brought in to provide context. Dr. Angela Ramirez, a sociologist specializing in race relations, explained how implicit bias operates. It's not always about overt racism, she said. It's about the split-second assumptions we make based on stereotypes ingrained in our society. When Susan saw Marcus jogging, she didn't see a neighbor. She saw a threat. And that perception has real consequences. The police department also faced criticism for their response. While the officers hadn't escalated the situation, many questioned why they had responded so quickly to what amounted to a non-issue. The police chief defended the department's actions, stating, "We're obligated to respond to every call, but we're also reviewing our protocols to ensure we're not contributing to unnecessary escalations." As the conversation continued to unfold online and in the media, Marcus became an unwilling symbol of resilience and grace in the face of prejudice. His calm demeanor during the encounter was praised, but he rejected the idea that he should be celebrated for simply surviving an unjust situation. "I'm not a hero," he said during an interview with a national news network. "I'm just a guy who wanted to go for a jog without being treated like a criminal." The story resonated far beyond Marcus's community. Celebrities, politicians, and activists weighed in, using the incident as a catalyst to call for broader societal change. Conversations about racial profiling, implicit bias, and the need for police reform intensified. But amidst the public discourse, Marcus grappled with a mix of emotions. He appreciated the support, but was also frustrated by the fact that his personal experience had become a spectacle. "This isn't entertainment," he told a friend. "This is my life." The tension continued to build as calls for accountability grew louder. Susan Miller issued a public statement, expressing regret for her actions. "I never intended for things to escalate the way they did," she said. "I see now that my reaction was influenced by unconscious biases, and I'm committed to learning and doing better." Her apology was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a genuine step toward healing, while others dismissed it as damage control prompted by public backlash. Despite the apology, Marcus remained skeptical. "Words are easy," he said. "Real change takes action." As the community wrestled with the fallout, one thing became clear. This incident was a turning point. People were being forced to confront uncomfortable truths about race, privilege, and belonging. And while the path forward was uncertain, the conversation had been ignited, and it wasn't going away anytime soon. In the weeks following the incident, the story took on a life of its own. News outlets across the country highlighted Marcus's experience as a glaring example of racial bias in everyday life. The footage of him standing calmly as officers questioned him became symbolic of a larger struggle, one where dignity often had to be maintained in the face of unwarranted scrutiny. But as public outrage simmered, journalists and activists dug deeper into the broader implications of what had happened. Was this just an isolated event involving one woman's poor judgment, or was it symptomatic of a systemic issue woven into the fabric of suburban America? Investigations revealed that this wasn't the first time police had been called on black residents in Marcus's neighborhood for benign activities. A local community watchdog group compiled police dispatch records and found numerous instances where calls were made about suspicious individuals who were simply walking, jogging, or waiting for rideshares. Disturbingly, most of those described in the reports were Black or Latino. When you look at the data, a clear pattern emerges, said Jasmine Patel, a data analyst and activist working with the Watchdog Group. There's this unspoken assumption that people of color don't belong in certain spaces, and that assumption often leads to calls like the one made about Marcus. The police department initially downplayed these findings, claiming that their responses were based solely on citizen reports. However, community pressure forced them to reevaluate their approach. A task force was created to review the department's protocols for handling non-emergency calls and to provide officers with training on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. Meanwhile, Marcus became a reluctant advocate for change. Though he had never sought the spotlight, he recognized the importance of using his platform to push for meaningful dialogue and reform. He participated in town hall meetings, spoke at community events, and met with local officials to discuss ways to build a more inclusive and equitable neighborhood. One of the most pivotal moments in the unfolding story came when Marcus agreed to meet with Susan Miller. The meeting, arranged by a local mediator, was held in a neutral setting at a community center. Tension hung in the air as they sat across from each other. "I'm sorry," Susan began, her voice trembling. "I realize now that I made a terrible mistake. I let my fear control me, and that fear was rooted in biases I didn't even know I had." Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate the apology," he said after a long pause. "But I need to ask, why did you think I was a threat?" Susan struggled to find the right words. "I don't know," she admitted. "I saw you jogging, and something in my mind just reacted. I realize now how wrong that was." Their conversation, though uncomfortable, marked a turning point. Susan agreed to participate in anti-bias training and volunteered to work with local groups focused on fostering community understanding. Marcus, for his part, acknowledged that while forgiveness was a personal journey, accountability was essential. The media covered the meeting extensively, framing it as a rare example of reconciliation in a polarized world. Some praised Susan for owning up to her mistakes, while others criticized her for only taking action after facing public backlash. But the investigation didn't stop with personal accountability. Activists pushed for structural changes, calling for better community education on racial equity and more stringent guidelines for police responses to non-criminal calls. Educational workshops were held, where residents learned about the history of racial profiling and its impact on communities of color. One powerful moment came during a workshop led by Dr. Angela Ramirez, the sociologist who had previously spoken out about implicit bias. "We have to unlearn centuries of conditioning," she told the audience. "It's not enough to say you're not racist. You have to actively work to dismantle the biases you carry, even the ones you don't realize are there." As Marcus continued his journey of advocacy, he also found solace in the support of his neighbors. Many had rallied around him, expressing their desire to create a more inclusive community. "This is our home too," one neighbor said during a block meeting. "We need to make sure everyone feels safe and welcome here." The discovery process wasn't just about exposing problems. It was about uncovering the potential for growth and understanding. Marcus's experience had sparked a reckoning, forcing the community to confront its blind spots and commit to doing better. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. "I didn't ask for any of this," he admitted during an interview. "But if my story can help change even one person's perspective, then maybe it was worth it." The aftermath of Marcus's encounter had sparked meaningful changes, both in his community and beyond. What had initially seemed like just another unfortunate instance of racial profiling had evolved into a powerful movement for accountability and reform. One of the first tangible outcomes was the police department's announcement of a new non-emergency response unit. The unit, composed of trained community mediators rather than uniformed officers, would handle calls involving suspicious activity that did not pose an immediate threat. This shift aimed to prevent unnecessary escalations and promote community trust. Captain James Martinez, the officer spearheading the initiative, explained the rationale behind it during a press conference. "We recognize that not every call requires a police officer with a badge and a gun. Sometimes, all it takes is a conversation and understanding," he said. The department also mandated comprehensive training on implicit bias for all officers. The sessions, led by experts like Dr. Angela Ramirez, included real-world scenarios designed to challenge preconceived notions and foster empathy. These conversations aren't easy, Dr. Ramirez acknowledged, but they're necessary if we want to build a society where people are judged by their actions, not by assumptions about who they are. Susan Miller, the woman who had called the police on Marcus, became an unexpected advocate for change. Humbled by the experience, she publicly committed to educating herself and others about racial bias. She partnered with local organizations to host community dialogues aimed at fostering understanding between residents of different backgrounds. "I can't change what I did," Susan said during one event, "but I can take responsibility and do everything in my power to ensure it doesn't happen again." Her journey from perpetrator to ally wasn't without its challenges. Some members of the community were skeptical of her intentions, questioning whether her efforts were genuine or merely a response to public pressure. Marcus himself was cautious but hopeful. "I don't need perfection," he said when asked about Susan's transformation. "I just need people to try, to recognize their biases and work to overcome them." Beyond the local community, the incident prompted a wave of conversations about racial profiling in other suburban neighborhoods. Activists and policymakers drew inspiration from Marcus's story, advocating for similar reforms in their own communities. Social media continued to play a pivotal role, amplifying stories of both injustice and progress. One particularly heartening development was the formation of a neighborhood diversity council, which Marcus co-chaired. The council's mission was to create initiatives that celebrated cultural diversity and fostered a sense of belonging for all residents. They organized events such as cultural festivals, storytelling nights, and educational workshops. "These events aren't just about having fun," Marcus explained. "They're about building connections and breaking down barriers. When you know your neighbors, it's harder to see them as the other." The shift in the community's atmosphere was palpable. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves began engaging more openly with one another. Conversations that had once been avoided were now embraced, even when they were uncomfortable. One memorable moment came during a block party organized by the Diversity Council. As music filled the air and children played on the lawn, Marcus looked around and saw neighbors of all backgrounds laughing and talking together. It was a stark contrast to the isolation and suspicion that had once characterized the neighborhood. "I think we're finally getting it right," one resident said to Marcus. While the changes were encouraging, Marcus knew the work was far from over. Progress was fragile, and complacency was the enemy. "This isn't about checking a box and saying we fixed it," he reminded the community during a council meeting. "It's about staying committed to growth and understanding." His words resonated with many, who recognized that true transformation required ongoing effort. The community had taken its first steps toward healing, but the journey was just beginning. As for Marcus, the experience had changed him as well. He had gone from being a private individual who simply wanted to enjoy his morning jogs to a respected leader and advocate for equity. While he hadn't sought the spotlight, he had embraced his role with grace and determination. "This isn't about me," he said in a reflective moment. "It's about all of us. If we can create a community where everyone feels safe and valued, then we've done something meaningful." The ripple effects of Marcus's journey were undeniable. What had started as a painful encounter had become a story of growth, transformation, and hope. And while there was still work to be done, the foundation had been laid for a brighter, more inclusive future. As months turned into a year since the incident, the community had undergone a profound transformation. What had once been a suburban enclave marred by implicit divisions had become a model for inclusivity and progress. The journey had not been without setbacks, but the long-term impact was undeniable. Marcus, who had initially wanted nothing more than to jog in peace, had become a symbol of resilience and leadership. His involvement in the Neighborhood Diversity Council continued, but he also took on larger roles, speaking at national conferences about community building and equity. "What happened to me isn't unique," he told an audience at one event. "But what we did as a community to address it, that's something others can learn from." Susan Miller's journey was equally noteworthy. Having faced intense public scrutiny, she had dedicated herself to being an advocate for change. She completed extensive anti-bias training and worked tirelessly with local organizations to promote understanding and empathy. Her transformation was met with both admiration and skepticism, but she remained committed to the work. "I can't erase what I did," she acknowledged during a community panel discussion, "but I can choose to be better every day. And I hope others will see that change is possible." One of the most significant indicators of the community's growth was the decline in racially motivated police calls. Thanks to the newly established non-emergency response unit, residents were encouraged to handle minor concerns through direct communication rather than resorting to law enforcement. Relationships between neighbors improved, fostering a sense of trust and accountability. The success of these initiatives caught the attention of other communities facing similar challenges. Neighborhoods across the country sought guidance from Marcus and the Diversity Council, eager to replicate their approach. The suburb that had once been a cautionary tale had become a beacon of hope. But beyond the structural changes, the real victory lay in the personal stories of growth and connection. One young black teenager, who had previously felt alienated in the neighborhood, shared how he now felt comfortable walking to the park without fear of being questioned. "People know me now," he said with a smile. "They say hi instead of looking at me like I don't belong." Elderly residents who had once harbored unconscious biases began attending cultural events and engaging in conversations they never thought they'd have. "I'm learning so much," one woman admitted during a storytelling night. "It's never too late to change." Reflecting on the journey, Marcus often thought about that fateful morning when his jog had been interrupted. What had initially felt like a moment of humiliation had become a catalyst for something much greater. "I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone," he said thoughtfully, "but I'm grateful for what came out of it." He often emphasized that the journey was ongoing. "We've made progress, but there's always more work to do," he reminded the community during a council meeting. Growth isn't a destination. It's a way of living. The legacy of the incident extended beyond the immediate community. Educational institutions incorporated Marcus's story into their curricula as a case study on racial bias and community resilience. Documentaries were made, capturing the journey from conflict to transformation. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was the sense of belonging that had taken root in the neighborhood. People who had once lived as strangers now saw each other as neighbors and friends. The barriers that had once divided them were slowly but surely coming down. As Marcus stood on his porch one crisp autumn morning, watching joggers pass by, he felt a deep sense of peace. The community had changed, and so had he. What had once been a painful memory was now a testament to the power of growth, empathy, and the human capacity for change. And while the journey was far from over, Marcus knew one thing for certain: they were on the right path.